That didn't sound like it was Michelle. Welcome to our last planning committee of 2021. The usual remarks before I turn to the agenda. This is a quasi-judicial meeting and no decisions have been made in advance of the meeting. Members sit on this committee as representatives of the whole council and not as ward representatives, and no one in this meeting enjoys parliamentary privilege as to what they say. Turning to the agenda then, as we've just had confirmed, this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site. The reference is unreadable. If you've got the agenda in front of you, you will know that you can click through. Otherwise, Birmingham City Council meetings on YouTube will take you to the right place. And that members of the press and public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosable pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in that agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. That's the standard declarations of interest statement, which applies to all City Council meetings. In addition, for Planning Committee, you may hear or see members excuse themselves from a particular item because they've taken part in previous discussions and expressed a view. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. It's on item 6. As this is in my ward, I have been contacted by residents about it, but I've not expressed any opinion on it.
Thank you for clarifying that. It's always useful to have that. Apologies. I have apologies from councillors Johnson, White, Meir, Suleiman and Beecham. On to Chair's announcements, and frighteningly, our next 3 meetings take us into February. So that's the 6th and 20th of January and the 3rd of February. I have a request to report to you in respect of today's agenda. We were due to have Councillor Dring speak on item 8. Unfortunately, she had an accident yesterday and is unable to attend. Because of the late notice, she hasn't been able to find a replacement or indeed to send in a written statement. So she has asked whether we can defer this to the next meeting. In view, it will do in a moment. I'm just going to say that in view of the particular circumstances and the lateness of the unavailability of Councillor Dring, I am prepared to put this to the meeting without it creating a general precedent. Councillor Booth, you'd like to propose a deferral? Okay. I don't think there's much to discuss. I've explained the situation. Are you ready to vote? Can I see those in favour of a deferral to the next meeting? And those against? And those abstaining? Thank you. I make that 6 in favour of deferral, 1 against and 2 abstentions. So we will defer that item until the next meeting. Thank you. And thank you to the applicants who have come along in case the decision went the other way. Okay, last item of business is the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of December. Can we approve those? Nodding is not picked up by the system. Thank you very much. That's agreed. And we are on to applications. We do have speakers today. We allow 3 minutes in total for objections and 3 minutes in total for support. I think we just have one person speaking each way on item 6, so that time won't need to be divided. James will do the timing. So on that basis, we'll move on to item 6, which is 251 Holly Lane, Erdington. The order in which we take the business of the item is first any updates, then speakers, then our officer's response to the speakers, and then we open it up to members. So if everybody's clear on that, I'll ask Tony for the East area whether there are any updates on this item.
No updates, thank you, Chair.
Okay, in that case, I will hand over to James. As I say, it's 3 minutes in total in opposition, followed by 3 minutes in total in support. And we have speakers both in objection and in support. And James will time your 3 minutes and indicate when you've got a minute to go.
First up, speaking against the proposal is Councillor Alden. Councillor Alden, the Chair said 3 minutes, and I'll give you the nod about half a minute before getting. Okay?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas, everyone. My name is Councillor Alden. I'm here representing local residents who've raised concerns about this application and weren't able to attend today. And I've got a couple of bits I just want to flag specifically from emails that were sent in who wanted to go and speak for work prevents them being able to. The first thing I'd like to flag is around the boundary treatment. I understand from the latest plan that's come in this week that the northern treatment is now being proposed to be 1.8 metres, which was originally 1.1. That was obviously of serious concern for residents. But what I'd also like to flag is that the western side, the side that will bound onto the Knox Brixworth development and the houses there, is still only proposed to be 1.1. And I'd ask that that was also made 1.8 metres as well, as indeed the properties on that development were made to be by planning. And residents are really clear that they'd like that condition within the any approval if the committee was going to approve it, so that we can make sure that that does actually happen. Turning on to the second email for residents' concerns, this raises concerns around both the building process and indeed whether the piling that will be done will cause damage to the existing properties. As you'll see from the report, very closely built up around this site. There's an unstable bank around this site, and the proposed scheme goes beyond the previous concrete slab that was there for the existing single-storey building. This clearly being a 3-storey building, and so there's real concerns about the impact that it might have on existing structures. There's also concerns about the impact on the habitats. So there's evidence on the site around hedgehogs and muntjac deer, and particularly the use of the embankment for those species to travel. Again, residents are concerned that there should be conditions placed if the committee was going to approve it to protect those habitats and ensure that there's still the ability for them to traverse across the site and around across the local area. And then thirdly, a resident wanted to flag with me particularly concerns about the negative impact of the development on your road properties, the impact it will have on light and privacy for those areas. You'll see from the report about issues around the elevation, the lack of ground stability, and therefore the conditions of the site will be unacceptable to local residents in terms of the impact on their health and home and quality of life. Rose was also obviously a notable departure from the existing use, which was a single-storey building. And there's real concerns from residents that any existing site, given it's already between 6 to 8 metres higher, thank you, from the surrounding site, they ought to be included as well. When you look at the existing aerial structure, you'll see a significant amount of vegetation. Some that's been removed, some is proposed to be removed, and that causes serious concerns to residents. And when you look at 6.6 in the report, you can just see visually the impact that removal of vegetation combined with the 3-storey developments proposed here will have on those existing properties, particularly on your road, where you can see the ground floor of the new development sits almost at the bottom of the roof line of the existing properties, and that's going to seriously overlook them. And when you look at the report as well, you can see there's concerns raised about the lack of amenity space. And when you combine those developments together, a lack of amenity space for the new development, and the overlooking nature of the development on the surrounding existing properties, then it's clear that this proposal ought to be refused. And if there was going to be development, it should be a smaller development of a lower height that's more in keeping with the local area. Thank you very much for the committee's time today.
Straight on to the supporter of the application, which is Peter Ike, the agent for the site. Mr. Ike, we'll have 3 minutes again. A minute to go, half a minute to go, I'll let you know, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would like to thank the Planning Officer for his report and welcome the recommendation before you for approval with conditions. The proposed scheme before you today is a conclusion of a journey which followed a detailed pre-application submission and extensive consultation which continued throughout the planning process, involving your planning officer, urban design, highway officers, meeting local residents and councillor, and numerous consultee responses. The final scheme presented today represents a cohesive design proposal that has the benefit of taking cognizance of the issues raised during consultations in reducing the scale, height and mass of the original proposals. This resulted in a reduced number of dwellings from 14 apartments to 11. Private amenity space for the residents on site has been increased from the original submission and improves and enhances on the original concrete and tarmac hard standing that existed originally. New boundary fencing has been increased in height and reinstated to improve security and protection to the embankment, as well as incorporating new additional planting to the designated ecological borders to the north and west of the site. This in turn strengthens the existing natural habitat that surrounds the existing site. Additional tree planting to enhance the setting and improve the ecology is welcomed and encourages more wildlife and biodiversity on the site. Building materials have been carefully selected to reduce the scale and impact of the upper floor, with emphasis on the ground and first floors and a subservient upper floor second floor appearance. This was agreed with the urban designer. The design changes through the planning process have been undertaken to reduce the impact of the second floor on the adjoining neighbours, setting back the upper floor and lowering the roof. Generally, the overall layout and design complies fully with the Birmingham City Planning Technical Standards and Guidance for separation distances and avoids any overlooking and overshadowing as evidenced in the planning application documents. There is adequate provision in line with technical standards for integral covered secure cycle parking, car parking and secure bin storage facilities. The proposed new use of the site sees a non-conforming brownfield light industrial use replaced with a wholly sustainable residential development, reducing the industrial commercial impact within a long-established residential setting. This in turn means fewer vehicles, no commercial activity and reduced noise and nuisance. I would emphasise the planning officer supports the proposals in his report, and I urge the committee today to equally support the recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ike.
Thank you. So I'll return to Tony for a response to the points raised by our speakers.
Thank you very much for those comments. I'll go through them in turn. So in terms of comments made by Councillor Robert Oldham, in terms of the proposed boundary treatment, it was originally proposed to secure the whole site by 1.8 metre high fencing. It's now proposed to have 1.8 metre high fencing both at the bottom of the bank and also to the top of the bank, adjoining the residence to the residence to the 1930s dwellings. So we've got essentially two lots of 1.8 metre high fencing to go in there. In terms of the site backing onto not brickworks, we have the proposed development plus a car park to the rear and landscaping. At the rear of the car park, it was proposed to provide 1.8 metre high wicket fencing. I think Councillor Oldham would seek to introduce 1.8 metre high fencing at that point if committee were minded to approve the application, which there is a condition 13 that relates to boundary treatment. And we can look at that when we come to discharge that condition if members are minded to do so. In terms of piling, there is a bank around most of the site. It's about 5.5 metres adjoining the dwelling houses and about 3.5 metres adjoining the flat. So there is a bank. We have attached a condition 17, to look at the method of piling. Obviously, at the end of the day, this is the applicant's responsibility to make sure that the piling is done in a responsible way. But in terms of details, we have attached a condition that will be looked at by our Regulatory Services Department at the appropriate time. In terms of habitat, the amount of hard standing on the site at the moment will be greatly reduced. We had, prior to the site has now been cleared and scraped back, but we had an area of about 88 square metres of landscaping on the site prior to the site being cleared. This proposal allows for 491 square metres of landscaping. So the amount of soft landscaping on the site will be increased greatly by 403 square metres. In terms of the bank itself and trees around the site and so on, we are going to lose 4 trees, but it's proposed to provide 20 additional trees on site as part of that increased landscaping work. And that will obviously support ecology and wildlife and so on. We have attached 2 conditions 10 and 11, for details of that enhanced habitation. In terms of amenity space, yes, it is lower than policy requirement. We require 30 square metres per flat, and it's proposed to provide around 23 square metres. That doesn't include the bank, so we haven't included the bank within that calculation. So there is obviously that additional green space that residents will be looking out onto, and there are nearby recreation grounds and parks within close walking distance of the site. Moving on to loss of light and outlook, we have carefully considered this. We had extensive pre-application discussions, and as the agent has pointed out, that the development has been reduced from when it originally came in as a pre-application, and it is policy compliant. In terms of the elevation to the 1930s dwellings, there will be no habitable room windows to that side elevation. There will be windows to secondary glazing to kitchens. So we effectively have through lounge stroke kitchens. There'll be a secondary window to the kitchens, which will be obscurely glazed and non-opening, apart from an element above eye level, 1.8 metre high. So effectively, there'll be no overlooking to the 1930s dwellings. And in terms of separation distances, policy requires 12.5 metre separation distance plus 1 metre for each change in level. So if we assume that this is a 2-storey building, because the second floor is set back by 6 metres, so we have the 12.5 metre separation distances plus 5.5 metres to account for the height of the bank. So the nearest dwellings should be 18 metres away. And even if we call this a 3-storey dwelling, it should be 21 metres away, an additional 3 metres. In this case, at the nearest point, they are 24 metres away. So we do exceed policy in terms of separation distances by quite some measure. In terms of the separation distance to the nearest apartments, again, policy requires effectively 16 metres. And if we call this a 3-storey property, it would be 19 metres. In this case, it's 20 metres away. So even if we strictly apply separation distance policy, it is policy compliant. In terms of the agent has mentioned improved habitat, improved landscaping and tree planting. The fact that we've carefully looked at the design. In terms of the ground and first floor, it's proposed to provide red brick. as a material to complement and to fit in with the surrounding area. The second floor, which will be set back, will be a metal-clad structure and with a low roof, which will reduce the impact. In terms of the elevation itself, it won't be one continuous elevation. There is articulation and it is set back, so it's not one solid built form. And finally, in terms of cycle parking provision, bin storage, and so on, they are all policy compliant. And the agent also pointed out at the end of his 3 minutes that we are moving away from an industrial site, which has been used for industrial purposes for quite a number of years, which we could consider a non-conforming use, to providing much needed residential accommodation on the site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll open up to members who wish to comment or ask questions. Councillor Moore?
Thank you, Chair. Whilst this site was a non-conforming industrial use, the impact it had on the surrounding residential area was quite minimal. And I think that's reflected in comparison to what will be with this development. And the diagram shown at 6.6, which shows what was prior and what's going to be what is proposed, and how that is significantly different. And I think certainly my concern is that this proposal is quite dominant on the embankment. It's raised significantly above, and the residential properties both on Yule Road and also that form part of Holly Park Drive. This is going to be something that's going to be a dominant feature on the hill, basically, and it's not fully screened as the previous building was before. Whilst there's some talk of boundary treatments and some new trees to be planted, this isn't going to be shielded very well from their view. And I'm also concerned about how intensive it is, because as is referred to in the report, the amount of amenity space is not acceptable. It's below policy compliance. So therefore, this again suggests to me that this is over intensive for the site. And perhaps if something was smaller, more in keeping with the area was proposed, which was less tall, basically, I think that would be something that's much more acceptable. But I'm really uncomfortable with how this application has been presented, and particularly given the diagram at 6.6, just it is overly dominant and overly intensive for what is this residential area. So I'm afraid I can't support it in its current form.
Councillor Stanford.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, I'm pleased with this application comes on the ground of the site, which is positive. I think one of the only positives I can find for the proposal. So my first concern is around the stability of the ground. I appreciate there's a condition in the plan to ensure there's a risk report taken on that. Notwithstanding that report, I'm secondly concerned is again over the elevation of the proposal. So I was wondering if we could get a clarification on the policy that you mentioned on distances between properties. So you referenced there are different distances depending upon the scale of the property, i.e. a 1 floor, 2 floor, 3 story. I wonder if the elevation before the ground level of this proposal is taken into consideration. Whilst this is obviously a 3-story proposal, in effect, the additional ground height adds an additional 2 stories in effect. So I wonder if that is something which is taken into consideration within the policy. Please excuse my ignorance for not knowing that. And the final thing which I referenced, the fact that we're looking at plans to have windows that are frosted clearly indicates that there is going to be line of sight between the existing residential properties and this new development. With that in mind, although you mentioned that only the very top windows will be openable and won't be frosted, being 6'5", if I was feeling particularly nosy, I can assure you that I could look through those windows and invade the privacy of my neighbours if I so choose. So I think on that basis, again, I would struggle to be supporting the application.
Councillor Cornish.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I actually just find that the application is far too insensitive in terms of this site. Overlooking the existing properties due to difficulty in land is very much a very, very strong concern for the local residents. And the lack of green space is another situation which is unacceptable. Boundary treatment, I also feel, is insufficient. This will have a significant detrimental effect on the amenities of existing properties. For that reason, we won't be supporting this application.
Thank you. Tony, do you want to come back on those, and then we'll see if anybody else wants to add anything?
Thank you for those comments. So in terms of the embankment, clearly the site is made up ground. It was used for industrial purposes since 1997, so it's clearly an industrial site. And in terms of the impact of that on neighbours, it does seem like the site wasn't used to its maximum capacity in terms of traffic movements, noise and disturbance, but clearly we would have had no control over vehicular movements, lorry movements, noise and disturbance, and so on. So I think it's clearly a positive that we are moving from industrial to residential, and it's clearly residential area. And what we're essentially considering here is the impact of this development on the adjoining neighbours. Now, the made-up ground to the 1930s semis is 5.5 metres. So policy says that we need to allow 5.5 metres in terms of separation distance on top of the existing policy. So if they were both at the same level, policy requires 12.5 metres for a 2-storey building or 15.5 metres for a 3-storey building. So if we take the 15.5 as the worst scenario, plus the 5.5, we end up with 21 metres. So policy says that we should be 21 metres from the nearest residential property. Now, in this case, we're 24 metres. So in terms of policy, from the nearest property, we do exceed that distance. Now, as the agent pointed out, the second floor is actually set back by 6 metres. So it would be almost difficult from the ground floor to physically see the second floor. So the impact is easily policy compliant in terms of separation distances. In terms of the actual elevation itself, it's been articulated. So the diagram that Councillor Moore pointed out, the cross section, that is the worst scenario. The building is essentially 3 or 4 blocks. So we have each block is set further from the boundary. And within each of those apartments, we essentially have quite a long lounge kitchen with full height glazing looking to front and rear of the properties. And then within those rooms, we have a secondary window to the kitchen element, which is obscurely glazed, and we have the top element which can be opened. We could have conditioned that to be non-opening if members felt that would assure you in terms of overlooking. In terms of the stability of the bank and how that would impact on neighbours, the first thing I would say that at the bottom of the bank we have an access drive which accesses adjoining garages. So in terms of neighbours, their gardens don't directly abut the application site. We have an access drive which accesses neighbours' garages. Plus, we have the garages themselves and other outbuildings and so on. But the stability of the embankment has been conditioned in terms of how that could impact on the embankment, and that's something that regulatory services will be involved with, and building regulations as well. And the responsibility of that work clearly is left to the applicant agent to make sure that there isn't a problem with that. Additional landscaping will be provided, which should help with the stability of the embankment. I think that covers all of those points. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just check, Tony? I'm looking at the map at the end of the report, and it looks as if one of those properties with the access road, if I'm looking at the embankment in the right place, doesn't in fact have a garage. Is it number 55?
Yeah, 55, yes. Yeah.
There's no garage shown, and in the absence of other evidence, then that may involve the garden abutting the embankment.
I think photograph 4, I think it clearly shows the garages that are there and the embankment, and clearly shows, I suppose, the level of screening that is provided presently, and that will be improved once the development is completed.
Okay, anybody else wish to speak on this one? I can see people scrolling through the report, but I'm not seeing anyone else wishing to speak. Councillor Straker-Wells. Could you speak up, please?
Right. Thank you, Chair. And having listened very clearly, but it is very carefully to what's been said, and Councillor Alden's concerns for his residents, and I respect that, obviously, being perspective of residents is very important, what they see. Nevertheless, I am struggling to find any reason to vote against it, because you previously had a one-storey building, which has now been replaced by 2 to 3 story buildings. The elevation seems to me to be a lot more sympathetic than one would expect from just looking at it as a large, over-intensive development. And I think that it's sufficiently staggered to present a village which will not be overpowering. So I'm inclined to consider this as something that is compliant. I'm reassured by the separation distance that you pointed. I'm also reassured about privacy and overlooking. The one question in my mind, and I will have to confess a particular obsession, hedgehogs. And if the biodiversity, I noticed that one of the conditions, or 2 of the conditions, mentioned a plan to secure wildlife in the area. But it doesn't really go from that. I would be delighted to have further reassurance that the wildlife will be not just not affected, but supported in terms of development, because Councillor Alden mentioned hedgehogs, that's particularly endangered species, and I have the soft spot of my heart for these wonderful creatures. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before I get Tony to reply? No, Tony?
Thank you for those comments. In terms of biodiversity landscaping, as I mentioned, the amount of soft landscaping on the site will be increased from 88 square metres to 491 square metres. So we do have quite a significant increase in terms of soft landscaping. You are correct. There are 2 conditions relating to improving the habitat, which our ecologists will be involved with the implementation of improving the habitat on site. So I can assure you that in terms of wildlife, the situation will be improved over and above what is on site at the moment.
Thank you. Before we move to the vote, I'm just checking out the conditions. We've got condition 17 on land instability. We've got condition 19 on construction method statement needing to be agreed. Is there anything else that's arisen? 10 and 11. Ecological survey and landscape and ecological management plan. It doesn't actually say biodiversity net gain, but that is what we're looking for from sites like this. So having clarified those conditions, are you ready to vote? Can I see those in favour of the application? Those against? And I think that accounts for everybody. That's 6 in favour and 3 against. Pandit, do you agree? So that is approved. Thank you. We move on then, staying with the east of the city, to Thameside Drive, Orton Way and Castle Vale. Tony, do we have any updates on this one?
No updates, thank you, Chair.
Does anyone wish to speak on this one? Okay, in that case, are you happy to proceed to the vote? Can I see those in favour of the application? That's 9 in favour, which is unanimously approved. Thank you. But we're not taking item 8. So we move on to our last application of the day. Quick change at the front here from east to northwest. And we're looking at former Ladywood Social Club on Ladywood Middleway. Pete, any updates?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We do have one update to bring to members' attention. It's the resolution in paragraph 8.1. It currently reads that the application should be deferred pending the completion of the section 106. In fact, it should actually read, excuse me, it's approved subject to the completion of section 106. So just a minor changing to the wording there from deferred to approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone wish to speak on this one? Councillor Stanford.
Thank you, Chair. My concern is that there's a real lack of affordable housing in the scheme.
Anyone else? No, Tony, Pete, sorry. Would you like to respond?
Yes, Councillor Stanford, very valid point. Obviously, affordable housing is a very important issue within the city, and the planning system does seek to deliver affordable housing where it can and where it's viable. The issue here is that the viability is marginal, and we have managed to secure a 5% contribution, which would be in the form of on-site, low-cost, 20% discounted from the market value, consisting of 5 one-bed flats and 2 two-bed flats. It's been thoroughly assessed by our independent advisors, and the bottom line is that the scheme is unable to provide any more affordable housing without it being unviable and wouldn't be able to be delivered. So it has been through a thorough process in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework and our own policies, and it is significantly below the 35% target, which is sought in policy. But as members of the Planning Committee, you will see that viability is an issue on almost every site we deal with where there is affordable housing. And on this case, we were able to achieve 5%, and we think it's the most appropriate that we can secure on the site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? In that case, if you're ready to vote, can I see those in favour? That's 9, which is everybody, so that is unanimously approved. And if I can just remark on the affordability question, what we actually need is the power to look for genuinely affordable homes rather than the existing scheme, which is a bit off market rent, and we need to have the powers to do that, which we haven't at the moment. Okay, that was our last application of the year. Bizarrely, the agenda goes from item 9 to item 12. Apologies for not spotting that before. But whatever number it is, it's other urgent business. Anyone want to start the list for the new year for what we might look at? No? Okay then. Item 13 is the standard authority to act between meetings. Can we agree that? Thank you. Item 14 is our, who knows when we'll next be able to meet in person, clause, which we discussed last time but has now been clarified. Obviously, we can only meet virtually if there's a change in regulation. That means also that officers have to be here. We can't do hybrids because they contribute to the decision. This clause, as we discussed, gives us the power to delegate, but with the understanding that there will be discussion. Hopefully we won't need to use it, but can we agree it just in case we do? More than one voice? Thank you. And that is the end of our meeting. Thank you all very much. There are some mince pies at the back if you'd like to take one, either for now or for later. There is some kitchen paper if you want to take one back to wherever you're going back to. And long-standing members will know that we are now heading for our traditional Christmas bonding activity, which doesn't involve the pub, does involve